Dark World is another one of those decks that has fallen into the deck build of repetition, for lack of a better term, which is not prepared to effectively do battle with the modern Yu-Gi-Oh meta. Unfortunately for Dark World decks, the newest support card, Brainwashing, is rather bad and will not break this repetition. Brainwashing is one of those cards that designers were too afraid could be too powerful, so they placed an unnecessary amount of restrictions on the card, which basically made it worthless. First restriction, the requirement of 3 or more cards in hand heavily limits playmaking, especially for a deck that has limited options for plussing. The second restriction, the requirement of a Dark World monster on the field, is just not consistent due to the limited special summoning opportunities available in Dark World. Otherwise, you have to play Ceruli, and that can be kind of bricky from time to time. Third restriction, the fact that the discarded card is random just rubs salt in the wound. I can't even discard what I want to discard. I have to try to set up my hand so that I get some form of benefit that I can maybe take advantage of, but I have to hold my resources back because of the 3 card requirement. In my opinion, brainwashing should be avoided like the plague in this deck. So, what are the problems with the popular modern build that seems to crop up with everyone's idea of, here, let me tell you about my Dark World deck? One problem is that it's too inconsistent due to the lack of some indirect support like card destruction and graceful charity, and the lack of general cards that trigger Dark World monster summons, let alone their second effects. The secondary problem is the general stun elements that were once common in Dark World decks are also heavily limited, the viruses and skill drain. Despite these issues, as mentioned, most people still run the Turbo Grapha build with a bunch of spell cards, a bunch of draw cards. Despite all that draw power, though, it still has a number of consistency and playmaking problems. In my opinion, this type of build does not work, period, and empirical evidence seems to support my position of argument. So for me, it is perplexing why people continue to run this type of Dark World build when it just doesn't do anything. I guess they have the idea that, well, it's the best Dark World deck. It's just Dark World just can't do anything in general. And I'm not so sure that's true. I think people might have fallen into the idea of groupthink. So, what type of build do I run to address the current problems with Dark World? For the Dark World monsters, I now only run 2 copies of Grapha, which may surprise a number of viewers. The issue with Grapha is that drawing it is not as useful as some may think because of the lack of quality cards to put it into the graveyard from the hand to activate its destroy any card on your opponent's field effect. There are a number of times when drawing Grapha will be met with an annoyed groan rather than a cheer. There are a number of different means to put Grapha from the deck to the graveyard where you want it to be in the first place, so 2 copies has never been a problem for me in this deck build. I run 3 copies of Snoww, which is a nice solid card with the quality search effect that tends to trigger meaningful combination strings with its ability to search Dark World dealings or gates, in addition to any Dark World monster. 3 copies of Broww for speed purposes, and as a level 4 or lower monster that can be used as material for Grapha summoning. Finally, 3 copies of Beiige, which also might be a surprise, but in this deck design, its special summoning ability is rather valuable. The normal summons dependent nature of Grapha summoning is a problem for this deck. So special summoning is important. And as a level 4, Beiige has rank 4 aspects and can be normal summoned when necessary. It just doesn't sit in your hand like gold or silvermine. That's all the Dark World monsters that I run for. I don't like any of the tribute monsters in this deck because it is certainly not a pure Dark World build, and most of those monsters just get in the way due to their lack of normal summoning without tribute. Also, the attack power is too lacking, and they have no real on-field effects. Basically, without running something like Ceruli, the level 5 and higher Dark World monsters that are not Grapha come off as just a waste of time. For the non-Dark World monsters, I really like 3 copies of Fairy Tale Luna and 1 copy of Fairy Tale Snoww in this deck, for it provides some nice deck thinning and some quality board control and interruption that Dark World inherently lacks as an archetype. One could argue that the requirement of normal summoning Luna can get in the way of Grapha summoning, and there are certainly times when this is true. But over the long haul, Luna does a lot of good work for the deck versus any detriment it provides. I like running 3 copies of Fiendish Rhino Warrior to accelerate both Grapha to the graveyard and enhance the efficiency of gates by creating numerous potential cost targets in the graveyard. The one allowed copy, generally popular choice of Tour Guide of the Underworld, is also in the deck for the ability to pull a Rhino and then make a rank 3 play, detaching Rhino to dump something to the graveyard, including Grapha, or to grab a Broww when Grapha is already in the graveyard, but you don't have a Dark World monster in hand. One card I never see in Dark World decks that I find is an excellent card in this deck is Absolute King Backjack, which is a fiend, allowing it to work with a number of Dark World direct and indirect support cards. It has a great order effect when sent to the graveyard, which can save your butt due to the combo nature of this deck, and can net a +1 with its banish effect during your opponent's turn under certain circumstances that can pay dividends right away. Finally, I run 1 copy of Eater of Millions as a nice banish option, a card that can draw attention away from Grapha in addition to supporting him, and when it's sent to the graveyard, it can be used as cost for gates due to its fiend standing. While Trance Fiend is a solid card for this deck, I just feel the normal summons is better used for either a Luna or a material for Grapha. For the spells, I run the obligatory 3 copies of Dark World Dealings as the best means to start combos, despite the unfortunate reality that it helps the opponent also thin his or her deck. The general staple of 1 copy of Raigeki to clear the field of problem monsters, 1 copy of Upstart Goblin to help deck consistency, and 1 copy of Foolish Burial to dump a Grapha, Fairy Tale Snow, or Backjack. Another surprise to some, or even most viewers, I only run 2 copies of Gates of the Dark World. Some swear by Gates, but Gates is not a great card for this deck because of its hefty requirement. 1 fiend in the graveyard to banish, and 1 fiend in the hand discard. If the hand discard could be anything, then this card would have been much better. The graveyard cost is also a problem because you don't want to banish Grapha. Thus, the available options for banishing can be limited, especially in the first few turns. Also, Gates is searchable by Snoww, limiting the overall efficiency of having 3 copies. Basically, Gates can be a dead card early in the duel quite often if your hand is not set up right, and in my experience, it happens more often than I would like. Finally, I run 1 copy of the Cheerful Coffin as the best spell-based substitute for Card of Destruction, although Card of Destruction it certainly is not. Addressing the commonly run omissions from this deck, I don't run Drag Down into the Grave, because I don't run a pure Dark World deck. If you run monster techs in this deck like I do, then the consistency and usefulness of Drag Down plummets. Also, I just don't like Drag Down as a card anyways, because you do not have control over what Dark World monster is lost, assuming you set up your hand properly before you activated Drag Down. And that lack of control seems to screw me over a lot when I ran Drag Down, so I just say heck with that. There are better options in my opinion. I'll run those better options. Also, I do not run Allure of Darkness because of the reduced targets. The removal for Gates, Allure and Gates just don't get along, and Allure does not actually address opponent threat. And the deck space for Allure is just better spent on cards that eliminate or at least mitigate those opponent threats. For the traps, I run 3 copies of Paleozoic Dinomischus, which is staple in all Dark World decks because not only does it trigger primary Dark World discard effects, but it also banishes a face-up opponent's card, which provides great versatility and assistance. While I don't normally like saying these things, the reality is any Dark World deck not running Dinomischus is not a good Dark World deck. If it's not running this guy, move on to another Dark World build to inspire you. 3 copies of Quaking Mirror Force to back up hands that are limited in combo ability, and with all of the chainable cards and bluffs in this deck, it is somewhat hard for the opponent to narrow down the Quakings and pick them off, which may give your opponent pause in an attempt to battle rush and OTK you, while you're busy trying to get those combo pieces. Basically, Quaking is a nice blowout card for this deck. Also, while I do not run it, Quaking does allow one to actually get efficiency out of Dark World Lightning. I run 2 copies of Lost Wind because, wow, Grapha can be a sitting duck most of the time, and Lost Wind offers the dual support of negating annoying monster effects that can banish, bounce, or spin, and also lowering the attack points of those monsters Grapha cannot hit over at its base 2700 attack, or even its enhanced 3000 attack with gates on the field. Finally, I run 1 copy of Torrential Tribute as an interrupter, and 1 copy of Dark Smog as another means to trigger the primary Dark World effect and to remove threats from the opponent's graveyard. Not surprisingly, I do not run Skill Drain because of the Fairy Tale monsters. Drain tends to be more of a liability than a benefit in this particular deck design, and I only side Eradicator Virus because it can be too hit or miss for my taste when you don't know what deck your opponent is playing. The extra deck is generally wide open. Basically run your favorite rank 3, 4s, 8s, and even Link monsters if you want. For me, I run 1 number 38 Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy, 1 Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand, 1 number 23 Lancelot Ghost Knight of the Underworld, 1 Cairngorgon Antiluminscent Knight, 1 number 103 Ragna 0, 1 Tornado Dragon, 1 number 106 Giant Hand, 1 number 82 Heartland Draco, 1 Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer, 1 Gaga Cowboy, 1 number 47 Nightmare Shark, 1 Phantom Knights of Breaksword, 1 Super Quantal Mech Beast Gram Pulse, 1 Leviair the Sea Dragon, and 1 Dante Traveler of the Burning Abyss. If you don't have your hands on Dante, and it seems like Burning Abyss is going to be the hot ticket now because they've gotten a Link monster. Another option is, because the Dinomischus are level 2, you can run a Sky Cavalry Centuria here instead, because there are times with this deck, especially because of Dark Smog, that it's not difficult to get 2 Dinomischus on the field at the same time. In the end, I like this new Dark World build because the Fairy Tale monsters provide excellent interruption and field control, an element Dark World sorely lacks on their own, and the other monster techs like Backjack and Eater help conceal some other weaknesses in this deck. In my opinion, this deck runs better going second over going first due to that 6th starting card, for despite the usefulness of the monster techs in this deck, it is still at its heart a combo deck, and if you do not get those combo cards, then it can be a little slow. It is combating this slowness where the techs also help. Overall, I just don't think the common turbo build that typically runs 13 to 15 monsters, or even my previous build that focused on kind of a Grapha grind, is the way to go for the future of Dark World, unless some actual good new support is released, or certain cards come off of the ban list, neither of which is likely. So, is this deck competitive? I would say yes, but not surprisingly, it does have some level of consistency problems because, as mentioned, it is a combo deck. However, those consistency problems are nowhere near the consistency problems or the power problems that plague the more popular meta Dark World build. Well, that is my updated Dark World deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.